Hi, I'm Bruce Williams, CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. This is Chamber Chats, and I just want to begin, as always, by recognizing that I live and work in the traditional ancestral territory of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish nations, the Songhees and the Esquimalt. It's our pleasure and privilege to live and work alongside them every day. These chats are made possible by support from Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, and by C-SPAN Victoria Shipyards. And we come to you, of course, here from the podcasting studio at the Czech Media Group. We're going to talk today about the transitioning that's happening into housing. People who have been camping. It's been in the news a lot, and there's parts of this whole story that aren't told. Today, we're going to tell those stories, and I have three people joining me to do that. Kelly Roth is the Executive Director of the Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. Julian Daly, returning to Chamber Chats, is the CEO of the Our Place Society, who actually won Nonprofit of the Year at our Business Awards. So congratulations for that, Julian. And Murray Langdon, Director of Community and Stakeholder Engagement for BC Housing, and no stranger to the Czech building, that's for sure. So thank you, all three of you, for being here. Kelly, I'm going to begin with you. Just really quickly, give me a description of your organization and your role in this whole process of finding houses for these people.
Great, thanks for that. And just a little correction, it's the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. We often get assumed as the Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness, but we are actually a regional coalition. And our role is to support coordination, communication, and collaboration across stakeholder groups in order to move toward our mission of ending homelessness. So our role specific to this is always to support communication and coordination amongst folks in this particular endeavor of the encampment move-outs. We had a very on-the-ground role as well, as we have a peer housing support team that actually were one of the active partners on the ground in support of that work. So that would be my quick summary for our role in the whole thing.
Yeah, because this covers a lot of platforms, the work that you do. Julian, you've been on this program before, but let's get a quick snapshot of Our Place and what's your role in this process we're discussing.
Hi, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, Our Place works with folk who are homeless and who are living in poverty and just having a pretty tough time in their life one way or another. And our role in this has been to be the operator and manager of a number of shelters and transitional housing spaces, most notably the Russell Street Shelter and the Tiny Homes Village. And all the folk that have been moving out of the camps have been coming into our shelters and our transitional housing, and indeed some into the hotels that we also manage and operate.
And Murray Langdon, we hear a lot about BC Housing here at the Chamber. We actually did a podcast with David Eby, your minister. But just quickly tell me, your organization, what's your role in this whole process we're talking about today?
Well, we're one of the active partners, Bruce, and we're very glad to be here today. BC Housing, we develop, we manage, we administer a wide range of subsidized and supportive housing around the province, but we also have undertakings. We license residential builders, we administer owner builder authorizations, we carry out research, education. So really we look at industry, consumers, the whole affordable housing sector, and it's our role to be an active participant in all of British Columbia's communities.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I want to begin by talking about this process of decamping people who are the ones that have been sort of on the radar for everybody for a long time, moving them into housing. So this process that's underway right now has gone pretty well into the Russell Street facility, into the tiny house neighborhood and all those other ones that we've talked about. So Kelly, let's begin with you. Tell me about the process from your point of view and what you've seen and heard so far.
Great, love to. Actually, what I'm most excited about with this process was the unbelievable coordination across stakeholders to support people to move. So we have, as a sector, moved 229 individuals safely from encampments into shelter or supportive housing. So that the shelters and the supportive housing include moving folks into the Memorial Arena, Capital City Centre, My Place Shelter, the Russell Street Shelter, Tiny Homes. We moved an additional 50 people into a range of supportive housing, for other shelters into subsidized housing, and folks who just needed income supports into market housing with a rent supplement. So the opportunity for people then within our system to transfer into the appropriate location for them allowed us to move 30 of those folks from shelters and supportive housing into market rent with rent supplements, from supportive housing or transitional housing into into a subsidized unit. That's something we call positive transfer. When people are ready to be in a different kind of housing with different kinds of supports, or perhaps don't need any support anymore, they're just ready to be, supported maybe financially into a market rent location, then folks have been moved. And what's amazing is that there were 6 supportive housing and shelter operators, several health teams, and outreach partners from at least 6 other health and housing organizations who all came together to support this. One comment that we had from a person after having a peer support worker helping them made this comment: "Thank you for sticking with me these last few days, because without it, I was going to go back to Beacon Hill Park." So people are nervous about moving. When folks have been through this pandemic, allowed to shelter in place for, the better part of a year now, there's a real settled feeling. It's a very scary thing to transition. We all know how hard it is to move. So what I'm really excited about to do with this is that the whole community has come together. There's been neighborhood associations, local community folks bringing food, care tents set up by on the ground teams to support these folks for a long time. And now have all been part of supporting folks to choose, if they choose to move into one of the locations that we've been able to provide. So that's what's exciting for us about this. Really has been a community-wide effort to bring people together.
And Julian, with Our Place, you have people that are helping them do this transition. Can you just talk a little bit about physically, how does that happen? If a person is going to be transitioning from living in a tent to living in one of these facilities in the tiny village or on Russell Street, how does that all happen?
Yeah, they arrive with as much stuff as they can bring and carry, because we have limited storage space. Some of the people in the tents in the camps have accumulated quite a lot of stuff, and unfortunately we can't take all their possessions in, so they need to decide what are the things that they want to bring with them and to the limited storage, and they come in and they're greeted, and we have a welcome pack with candy and other things to hopefully make folk feel that they are at home, coming home. And we sit with them and we talk through the place and what the culture of it is, and what the expectations are in terms of behavior, but also what's on offer to them in terms of services. And then folks sign up to an agreement to abide by the rules, but also we want to be very clear with folk that we're there to not just to impose rules, but to support them to make some changes, and then get the things they need, and whether it's in terms of health or mental health or addictions or employment, education, income, housing even, because not everyone wants the same kind of housing, right? So we work with them, start that process there, and then when they come in, because we want a really strong message to folk coming in that it's not just a home, but it's a place where they can actually get needs met and begin a process of transformation on the pathway to permanent housing. And then they're handed off to our folk from Island Health and other agencies who do an assessment with them around health and see what supports they might need. And then they are shown to their room or pod, and the process of living with us starts.
We're going to come back to that, supports that are in place on the ground with these things too. Murray, this is not only happening here, though. This with BC Housing, this is across the entire province. How's this rolling out elsewhere?
It is, and we see similar circumstances, Bruce, to be quite candid, because it is a challenge for a community. And as such, it takes a community response. Very few, if any, communities that I've come across in, and I'm immersed in dozens of them, are immune to this. They're not only seeing the challenges with housing, with affordability, they're also seeing the mental health acuity and crisis. We're also seeing the overdose crisis. And then we already have a challenge with housing. So this constellation of crises that have erupted into British Columbia have really set the scene of a very, very complex challenge. Our role in this, because no one agency owns the challenge, but in partnership with folks like Julian and Our Place, and Kelly with the coalition, banding together with the city, with law enforcement, with Island Health to come up with unique, tailored solutions to the challenge is what we're here to do. And we find in the capital region, we are seeing very strong buy-in from the partners. We're seeing people at the table with effort, with intensity, in order to respond to this very, very deep and prominent crisis.
Yeah. Next, I want to talk about managing the very issues that put these people into this circumstance. So, Kelly, I'll begin with you once again on that. Someone shows up, they're in this circumstance because they may be having a profound challenge with their mental health. They might be dealing with an addiction as a form of self-medication. So they're not just going to be there in a room living without some sort of treatment. So tell me about that.
So, and probably Julian can speak more to the kinds of supports that are in the operations of the housing, but I can speak a little bit to the circumstances of folks and the spectrum of circumstances. So one of the myths is actually that every single person experiencing homelessness has a mental health and substance use challenge. That is just one aspect of somebody's circumstances. So for folks that are dealing with mental health and substance use challenges, the connection to services and supports before moving into locations is one of the things that our sector has been really working hard to do through this COVID pandemic. And to Marie's point, the fact that we've had a COVID pandemic and an overdose, we've been dealing with an overdose crisis, an opioid crisis for a long time now. So one of the really critical factors was having harm reduction teams coming together, meeting people in a person-centered way where you're at. So if somebody's looking for an opportunity to be able to get off of whatever they're using, there's substitution kinds of mental health supports and addiction supports and harm reduction supports, regardless of where they are at in that contemplation, pre-contemplation, or readiness sort of journey. So the health sector coming together with harm reduction supports in the camps has been a really critical aspect to preventing overdoses, and then supporting people as they move out of encampments and into housing, making sure that those same supports are still available is a really critical factor for people. We don't want people to fall through the cracks and in transition no longer have access to supports. So a key aspect of the way we do our work across this sector in particular is relationally. People have relationships, they maintain those relationships, and they're supported to transition into whatever their next piece is. We don't want people left feeling alone, isolated, or not having those sorts of health checks afterwards. So that's a critical aspect of supporting people in their journey.
Yeah, health checks. Julian, you mentioned that Island Health is involved in helping these people orient themselves into these facilities. What other sorts of things are in place?
Yeah, so there's Island Health, and then we also have the folk from Kelly's organization, and we also have AVI and Umbrella, which are harm reduction organizations. For example, they're supporting the work with people who do have addictions, and we have our own workers of social work perspective, and we have our employment workers coming in as well, and then we're going to have, when the communities come a bit more settled, have a range of volunteers coming in with various support services as well, because we want to get a tailor-made plan for everyone, so that, because again, like as Kelly says, the spectrum of mental health needs, there's also a spectrum of other needs as well, and that this idea that there's a one size fits all for homeless people, that all homeless people are the same, is clearly as much nonsense as any group of people are all the same. There's as much diversity in the homeless community as any community, so we want plans that are tailor-made to folks' particular needs. One thing I would add, though, that Bruce, while there's a fair bit of support available, and it really works for most people. There are some people who do come into the shelter and the housing who really have needs that are very difficult for us to meet, and certainly from our place, and really need clinical help because they are mentally very unwell, and to a degree that they do need intervention, I believe, from a doctor and or psychologist, people who are trained to provide them with the kind of support and care they need, and we're just not able to do that, and that's a challenge, And to Kelly's point, that's actually a very small number of people. Most people either have pretty much no mental health problems, or their challenges are moderate and absolutely manageable by themselves and with support from others. But there are some who really we can't support. And that's a real challenge for our community, I think, and not just our workers.
Yeah. Murray Langdon, long-term planning with BC Housing, has been talking about affordable housing, and some plans were announced recently to get that in place very soon in Victoria, in Saanich, and in Central Saanich. That's going to make a difference in this kind of circumstance, isn't it?
That's the attempt. And as while we try to deal with a contemporary challenge, which really is hitting a crisis point in terms of people with no fixed address, there's an overlaying challenge of affordability in the province of BC, which also falls under the realm of BC Housing. So there's been a recent budgetary announcement with a firm commitment of a sizable envelope of funding to try and address the affordability crisis. And I think, Bruce, this speaks to the overlay of challenges that we are a wealthy province. There is a lot within our communities, and yet still people are struggling to get by. And these are people. And I think one of the most profoundly disturbing stats that we've seen is our fastest growing demographic of people on the street are seniors, are 55 plus. And so when you take a look at the fabric of what our community is and all those folks that have made contributions to civil society, we now see people ending up in very challenging circumstances. So we know there's a spectrum of housing options that we need, from the very urgent crisis level right to what we see in Beacon Hill Park and in other parks, to what we see in terms of affordability, to having safe, secure, stabilized housing. That is what we're looking to do. And I see this is something that we see in all age groups. We take a look at people going through college and university. What does their future look like? So this is the contribution that BC Housing wants to make through its mandate to provide some affordable components to the capital region.
We're going to wrap it up next. I want to talk about something we referred to briefly before, and that's the neighbors. So when these facilities are opened up and they enter into a neighborhood, we've seen a bit of impact on the business community, for example, where people were living in hotels and it got a little bit disrupted. But let's talk about these neighborhoods that are being housed right now as people are being decamped. Kelly, you had an interesting story about what the neighbors are doing in one area. Tell me about that.
So one of the things that we've found as we engage with folks in local community, and North Park Neighborhood Association would be a great example of the actions and activities that took place for folks who wound up in a really dire straits when we had our snowstorm, and Central Park was dominated by snow and flooding. And it was an absolutely incredible outreach of folks who provided and supported the folks on the ground in the encampments to be able to get up off the ground, get platforms underneath them, get tents that would work for them. And that was before, we had this housing initiative that we're so appreciative of, because ideally we don't want anybody anywhere in a tent if they don't want to be there. And again, we really believe in human rights and choice and people making those determinations for themselves. But if we don't, as a sector, have options to offer them, people have no choice. So what we've noticed is that there's been a shift. There's been a shift because people have leaned in. One woman, I was on a CBC radio show a while ago, and one of the women called in, and her comment was, we're all just a paycheck away from being in a circumstance like this. And I'm not sure if it's COVID that's been part of changing things, but that people have a great deal more empathy. We've had so many neighborhood associations creating their own ad hoc groups, reaching in to support, the Fairfield Gonzales neighborhoods have a group of humans that are supporting people in the parks. We get calls at the coalition all the time. What can I do? Can I bring cookies somewhere? Can I bring food? What can I do to support? With tiny homes, we had 580 individual donations of funding. When you talk about, putting money where your mouth is, as the saying goes, but don't just talk about supporting something. But that was an amazing demonstration of public support for people experiencing homelessness and for some innovative solutions. So that for me is really encouraging. It's hard to hear the hate, around folks that are vulnerable. And that's one thing that's been challenging. And I've really seen a shift and an incredible outpouring of human support, empathy, kindness, and caring for folks experiencing homelessness. And it's really encouraging.
The stories that we hear through media are going to be reported as the way that the media chooses to do that. Julian, for example, there was a small fire in a waste paper basket of some paper that maybe some people thought was a bigger deal. Any fire is dangerous in any circumstance. We know that. But on the upside of these stories, tell me about the barbecue. Somebody's planning a neighborhood barbecue, right?
Yeah, it's to what Kelly just said. We've found and encountered incredible generosity and kindness and welcome to our guys. Yeah, there's been fear in communities, and that's really understandable. And there have been some mean comments too. But what I take away, what I'll always remember about the process of opening shelters and transitional housing in Victoria, is the warmth of the welcome of the neighborhoods that we opened in. People have brought cakes, flowers, and food, and one woman actually applied to the city of Victoria for a small grant of $500, and she's going to put that towards organizing a barbecue for folk in Russell Street, for the residents, but also for the local community. And I think that just speaks to such generosity of spirit and warmth of welcome. And one woman, I'll never forget, she said to me in tears, she said, I just don't want these people coming in to feel that they're hated and that we don't want them. We want them to know they're welcome in our community. Wow. I mean, it doesn't get any better or more humane or kinder or welcoming than that.
And across the province, Murray, that sort of compassion is being shown. I'm sure we know that people here have a big heart, but that's the same across the province, isn't it?
It is. And I have to say, one of the most positive experiences we've had from an engagement perspective has been the business community. Private sector operations and retailers have played a large role in that outreach, whether it be offering up barbecues, willing to sit on community advisory committees, actively engaging to come up with a community solution for what is a community challenge. And I think that dialogue has spanned the entire width and breadth of the province, Bruce, because like we mentioned off the top, no community is immune to these challenges, but it's that active civic participation that we're seeing from all sectors. And I actually have to hand it because the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce has been in a leadership position on this file and social issues for a number of years. And the continuation of this is manifested in this very dialogue. So with that continued active participation, how can we find solutions that work for the community as a whole to make sure we've got housing, stability, a vibrant economy, workplaces where people can go to, and then opportunities for everyone? That's what we're committed to do.
You're all doing very important work, and you're doing it well, and we want to thank you for your time today. Murray Langdon is the Director of Community and Stakeholder Engagement for BC Housing, Julian Daly, CEO of the Our Place Society, and Kelly Roth is the Executive Director of the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. And all of these organizations can reach out to you, and you can reach out to them so that we can help us all get through this circumstance. Thanks for being here today. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.
For more episodes of Chamber Chats, go to checknews.ca/podcasts.